Okay, good morning, everybody. We are on not beginning a new parak anymore because we've already begun a new parak, but let's continue the new parak that we have begun. Daf Lamed Amud Aleph Masechet Beitza. So we saw we saw the discussion about, well, we haven't actually said the phrase yet, but we saw the discussion about people doing things that they should not be doing and whether we should be saying something to them or not. Right? We got into this discussion about carrying certain things on Yom Tov. And going out and carrying the water in such a way that it's the same way as during the week. Okay, we are probably about a little bit before halfway down the page, just before halfway. We got up to the line that says Amale Rava Barav Chanina Abaye Tnan Ein Metapchin ve'ein Mesapkin ve'ein Melachtin. Right, so different types of clapping, whether you clap your hands together or you clap your hands on your knees or you get up and dance on Shabbat and Yom Tov. We said you would not do this. Why not? So this is a gzeira shemaitaken klei shiur, because you're going to start dancing and you're going to start clapping, and the next thing you know, you're going to go and fix your musical instruments that have broken, right? And then we mentioned, as Tosfot said, that nowadays this isn't really going to be relevant. I mean, we'll see the poskim are still concerned about this, but according to Tosfot, who says that nowadays we aren't baki and we don't really know how to fix musical instruments, and therefore we aren't going to be concerned. And we got into a brief discussion about when do we say that although the reason no longer applies, the Xera still applies, or vice versa? Okay, but that is what we saw in the Gemara. I would say Emin Tapchin ve'Mesapkin ve'Maktin Va'idna Tekach Hazina Da'avtanachi. But what's the question? The question is only mentioning this kind of as a side point, as tangentially, because the point is that we see people all the time. Ma'asim b'chol yom. Then we see people clapping and dancing on Shabbos, and we don't say anything to them. How can that be? Well, according to Tosfot, I understand, but according to everybody else, it's a problem. And truth is, even according to Tosfot, in the times of the Gemara, it was still a problem. Okay, so it says the Gemara, so then is what Rabbi Chanin says to Abaye. So Abaye answers back, he says, "V'letamech hadamar lo leitev ini shapuma delachya." Dilma migandele chefetz v'atila tuye v'anei nashi deshaklan chatzbayu v'azlam v'yad v'apuma de mevua v'lo minanu v'lo mida. Okay, don't worry, we'll go back and translate all of them. But the point is, it's funny. It's like this Gemara is kind of like going through all the things that people do wrong. You're saying like, well, we see that people do X and nobody says anything. Well, we see people do Y and nobody says anything. Well, we see that they do this and we don't do anything. Okay, so he says to him, why is it that you see people clapping and dancing and doing all this on Shabbat, and we don't say anything? So he answers back, he says, no, the point is not necessarily about this case, but the point is going to be a more general principle about when it comes to rebuking or not, because there are other things that people do and nobody says. He says, well, what's the example? He says, L'tamech, meaning according to you, you're questioning why it is that we don't, rebuke in this instance. So, well, hadamal. Okay, a different gears out there, whether it's Rabba or Rava. But Hadama Rabba. Lo leitiv inish apuma de lechia. So a person should not sit on the edge of the lechi. Okay. Dilma miganda le chefetz va'ati latuye. Because maybe something that you're holding, an object, is going to fall, it's going to roll out, and you're going to come and you're going to pick it up. In other words, a person sitting on the edge of the mavoi where the lechi is, which marks essentially the end of the eruv, the end of the area where you can carry, where you can't carry. So we're worried that you're going to be sitting there right on the edge, right? This is not to discredit Hanasi's tour up north next week, right? Life on the edge, that's something else. But you're sitting on the edge of the mavoi, and then the object's going to fall out, and it's going to be in the Reshut HaRabim essentially, and you're going to carry it. You're going to transgress the problem of carrying on Shabbat. Right. So Rashi says over here, he says apuma de lechia. What were we talking about? The lechia matir b'mavoi b'Shabbat that is right. That is the mechanism which allows you to carry inside the mavoi. But Dilma Maganda Lechefet says Rashi, the object's going to fall outside beyond the lechi. You're going to come and carry it. מתוך שאינו במבוי מקורה להכיר שזה רשות הרבים וזה רשות היחיד ומביאו. Why are we saying dafka in such a case? Because we're talking about a case where you have a mavoi that does not have a ceiling. A mavoi is essentially sort of an alleyway that leads outside of the courtyard, and you have a lechi, sort of a pole that you have that you're going to recognize where the lechi ends, or where the mavoi ends, and where you can no longer carry. But since there's no ceiling, you're sitting there, and you may not recognize in the moment. That's what we're saying. So the Gemara continues. So that's what we said that you're not allowed to do. Okay, so again, these women who are coming back, remember them, they were filling up their water last time, right? So they filled up their water, their buckets, and they're coming and they're sitting on the edge of the mavoi, and we don't say anything to them. Rashi says, once again, you are transgressing Yarnisud Rabbanan. They said, don't sit there, and they are sitting there. Okay, so you'll notice what's common in all these cases is that where we're saying that people do this, we don't say anything to them, even though we should. What's common, and this is going to be very significant, is that we're dealing with Isurei Rabbanan. We're not dealing with Isurei Doraita. But the answer that the Gemara gives, the reason that in both of these cases we don't say anything, okay, so very interesting. So the reason over there in these specific instances we say hanach lehem Israel, we say allow them to do to act the way that they do. Mutav sheyu shogegin v'al yu mazidin. It's better that they should be shogeg rather than that should be mazid. Okay, so this is different to what we discussed yesterday. I think yesterday it came up in the shiur that sometimes we say there's a principle in halacha we find in certain places called hanach lehem Israel, which means allow them to do it. We find a different language, a different place in the Rishonim. For example, in Ilchot Shabbat, we find and other places. So we find a concept where we say hanach lehem Israel, milo neviim b'nei neviim, which means essentially that's something that's become an established practice of the Jewish people. So oftentimes we assume that is going to be mutar. Right? That's not the usage of the Gemara over here. But sometimes you have a practice, you have a minhag that's been going on for generations. So we assume, how can it be that we've been doing this for generations? It must be that it's mutar. Okay, we have to find out how. We have to explore exactly why. But that's we assume it's okay. So for example, in Ilchot Shabbat, there's a well-known machloket regarding what's called shehiyah. We discussed this once, which is if I leave food before Shabbat, okay, on the hot plate, on the fire, on the stove, whatever it is. So there's no Isur D'Oraita because I haven't done anything on Shabbat. Right? The Isur D'Oraita of cooking, of bishul, is only when I cook food on Shabbat. But if I leave, let's say I leave uncooked food or not fully cooked food, right, on the fire before Shabbat or on the hot plate, so that's what's called, Rabbanan established a principle called shehiyah, which means leaving food on the fire before Shabbat. If it's cooked, if it's not cooked, a whole complicated sugya over there. And the concern is that you might come, if it's not fully cooked, you might come to stoke the coals. You may come to stoke the coals on Shabbat, and that would be an Isur D'Oraita. So therefore, Chazal said you can only leave cooked food. You can only leave food on the fire before Shabbat under certain conditions. Okay, so very relevant halachot when it comes to putting food on the hot plate on Friday night, etc. But without getting into it now, because it's a very complicated machloket between Hanani and Chachamim, it's in the third parak of Hilchot Shabbat. But the point is there are two opinions, right? One opinion that's a little bit more stringent, and one opinion there that's a bit more lenient. And the Rosh and the Rishonim writes that there's discussion as to who exactly we paskin like, and we find an expression that's brought that says that we can follow, if you see that people follow the lenient opinion regarding leaving their food to be eaten up on Shabbat. So it says hanach lehem Israel adukimem be'oneg Shabbat. I think that's the language, which means we don't get in the way of the Jewish people and their food. Meaning, it's if there's something that you need in order to keep the food hot and in order to enjoy oneg Shabbat, so we can rely on the lenient opinion. So that's just Again, I'm not giving now psak, I'm not giving halacha l'maaseh. It's very complicated. One has to know exactly what the parameters are. But the point is, there we find that expression of hanach lehem Yisrael. So that expression hanach lehem Yisrael over there, and in certain contexts, it means if you see they're doing something, it must be that it's correct, and it actually must be that it's mutar. Okay, and then we can discuss why. Here, the usage is very, very different. So it's interesting. Here, hanach lehem Yisrael means not that what they're doing is correct. Not that what they're doing is permitted, but sometimes there's something, and it's so difficult for people to, Rabbi Wein used to say that every rabbi only has a certain number of arrows in his quiver, right? And you have to know when to shoot the arrows. So there's certain things that people are not going to do. People are not going to change their minds. So even though it's actually, and we'll see here the distinction between the right, the Rabbanan, etc., is going to come into play. Even though it's actually something that they're doing which they should not be doing, nonetheless, if this is something which is so well established that we know they're not going to listen to us, so it's better that they should be doing it. Hanach lehem Yisrael, meaning let them off the hook. And it's better that they do it, that they should be shogeg. They don't know that it's asur, so they're going to carry on doing it anyway. So let them carry on doing it and not knowing, meaning it's going to be a lower level transgression of shogeg, rather than telling them that, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, and they're still going to do it anyway. So now it becomes a willful transgression. Now it becomes mezid. Right? So that's what it means. It means hanach lehem Yisrael mutav sheyu shogegin v'al yu mazidim. Okay, I'm going to show you a few places where this comes up in halacha l'maaseh as well. Sometimes people misinterpret this halacha, right? Mutav sheyu shogegin v'al yu mazidim is only said in certain cases. We're going to see certain limitations on it. It doesn't mean, right? You see a person. Let's say you see let's say you're on holiday, for example. Okay, or even not. You're walking around and you see a person with a kippah on. Let's give you this example. And they walk into a restaurant that's not a kosher restaurant. Okay, because they don't know, because they have a thing or whatever. I was just last week. I was in Italy, right? So I mentioned to you. So in the street in Rome, we have it's all on the one side all the kosher restaurants, and then very not so subtly it changes from the kosher restaurants to the kosher style restaurants. Okay, that word style contains within it a lot of problems. So let's say you see a person and you know that they're a tourist or whatever, and they're walking into a kosher style restaurant because they don't know that it's a thing. So would you say, okay, hanach lehem Yisrael, mutav sheyu shogegim v'al yu mazidim? Of course we wouldn't say that there. There we assume the person would know, the person would want to know. Even if the person wouldn't want to know, we should tell them, and if we tell them and they don't listen, okay. But here, this is the case. The case is where it's very, very limited where we would apply this principle. But it applies in these cases. So let's see. So the Gemara says, hanach lehem Yisrael mutav sheyu shogegim v'al yu mazidin. Achanami, right? So in these two cases that we've said, hanach lehem Yisrael mutav sheyu shogegim v'al yu mazidin. Okay. Now, Rashi says, okay, hanach lahem. Rashi a little bit further down. He says, "B'davar shehilgilu bo v'lo yachzeru b'hem." Okay, it's something which is very, very, they're very entrenched in, and they're not going to change their mind. Okay, they're not going to listen to you. That's when we would say this. Mutav she'asu shogim v'yosem mazidin lavo k'sheyed'u v'lo yanichu b'kach. So we let them transgress b'shogeg. Again, you're not allowed to transgress b'shogeg either, but we let them because we know that they aren't going to listen. Okay, now, he says, V'hanei mile, says the Gemara, V'hanei mile, these words, Rashi points out, Hanei mile means the hanach lehem Yisrael, meaning where do we apply this principle of hanach lehem Yisrael, sheyu shogegim v'al yu mazidim? That only applies b'drabanan. And not every drabanan we're going to see, but b'drabanan, aval b'doraita, lo. Okay? Meaning, we can't say this principle if somebody's going to transgress something which is doraita. And the idea is that the poskim write, what does it mean? Doraita maybe it only means if it's going to be explicit in a pasuk, because something which is doraita or something which is explicit in the pasukim, we assume that people should know. And if they don't know, well, we should tell them anyway. Okay, so the Gemara challenges that. It says, hang on a second. Velohi, is that not true? Meaning, is that correct? Lo shna bidoraita, velo shna bidorabanan. Lo amrina lo v'lo midei. Meaning, is that correct? That whether it's Doraita or whether it's we would have. Meaning, haven't we found again? Haven't we found that whether it's Oraita or whether it's Rabbanan, there are times where this principle would apply, that we wouldn't say anything. What's the example? That Tosefet Yom Kippurim Dolaitahu ve'achlu v'shatu ad shechashecha v'lo amrinanu v'lo mide. In other words, we find another place where this is brought, which is regarding the principle of Tosefet Yom Kippurim. Okay, there's a discussion in the Gemara elsewhere, but essentially the din of Tosefet, of adding on from Chol to Kodesh, of bringing in Shabbat early, bringing Yom Tov early, etc. It's all learned actually from Yom Kippur. That whatever time the fast begins, right, we have an obligation to add on, to extend Yom Kippur by a little bit, by a few moments, a few minutes, whatever it is, and to add on to Tosefet Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, and that is a din d'oraita. So according to this opinion, anyway. We see people that are eating and drinking until just before it becomes dark, okay, meaning they are not fulfilling Tosefet Yom Kippur. We don't say anything to them. So that is seemingly a proof that the Gemara is bringing that is a din d'oraita, and the principle of anachlem shiur shogegin v'ayu mesidin would apply even to a d'oraita as well. So as I said, there are those poskim are right that the difference here is not necessarily between the Oraita or the Rabbanan, but it's where something is explicit in the Psukim. Something that's explicitly stated in the Psukim, we can't say Hanachem Shiur Shogegin because we can't expect people to be shogeg about something that's explicitly written. Rashi says over here, Tosefet Yom Kippurim. Well, before that, he says Bid Rabbanan. He says Hecha de'igelu lamavad Rabbanan, where we find that people have become entrenched, right, to transgress on Rabbanan. For example, kenach metapchim, those who are clapping and dancing on Yom Tov, right? Venach yashvan apuma delechia, or those that are sitting by the edge of the mavoi, as we discussed. But Tosefet Yom Kippurim, we have to begin the day, we have to start fasting while it's still daytime. D'oraita, that is it. D'oraita is learned out in Afkalan, mive'initem et nafshotechem. B'tish'ah. The pasuk says that you start off on the 9th of Tishrei, but we all know that Yom Kippur is on the 10th of Tishrei. The Gemara learns out from there for a Tosefet. Okay, so that essentially is the Gemara. Let's look at a few pieces related to this in the Shulchan Aruch, okay, which was not in your Gemara, but here come the wonders of modern technology. Ta-da! Of places over here. Shulchan Aruch in Siman Shin, which is in Hilchot Shabbat. Okay, yeah, kama dinim pratiyim na'nogim b'Shabbat. A few different of Shabbat. Have a look here. Says the Shulchan Aruch. And again, Tosa notwithstanding, Nakot Kafal Yelech v'lo Malakid.
Did the sound disappear for anyone else besides me?
Yeah, we also lost it.
Okay. I hate to be the only one who's not hearing or seeing anything.
Okay,
This
is because I was praising modern technology. All right, I think it's an anti-Semitic conspiracy. Anyway, so I'm not sure how far I got. I was talking, and then I discovered that no one was there. So let me put the Shulchan Aruch back up. So he's talking about over here, right? Ein mitapchin hakot kaf el kaf, v'lo misapkin hakot kaf ha'yirach. You can't clap your hands together or clap your hands against your legs or whatever it is. V'lo mrakdin, and we don't dance. Okay. As we saw, this is all a gzeira that you might come to fix musical instruments. We saw Tosfot. Now, I'm going to skip here to the Ramah. Well, actually, we'll carry on because it's interesting. So, אפילו להכות באצבע על הקרקע או ללוח, אחד כנגד אחד, כדרך המשוררים, או לקשקש באגוז לתינוק, to make a sound with a rattle or something like that. או לשחק בו בזוג כדי שישתוק, to play with a bell, all these different things are going to be אסור because גזירה שמא יתקן כלי שיר. Now, says the Rama, v'hadem esavkim v'marktina itna v'lo machinan bo. Says the Rama, we see all the time, we see people clapping and dancing, etc. No one says anything. Mishum demutav sheyu shogagim. And the reason is what we saw in the Gemara, the principle that we say, better not to be, better they should be shogeg and not be mezid. Achshav, yesh omrim, tivizman hazeh hakol shalom. Nonetheless, there are those who say, it's based on Tosfot, that nowadays, in fact, it is allowed. We don't know how to make musical instruments anymore, and therefore there's no gzeira. It's something which is very, very uncommon. And it's possible that that is what all these leniencies are relying on. Meaning that in this instance, it's not just a case of mutav sheyu shogegim, but it's something more that. Now, the Mishnah, I have heard it said, sometimes people say, in a lot of yeshivot, for example, during Kabbalat Shabbat, they'll go and they'll start dancing, etc. So there are those who want to say that no, when the Gemara says meraktin, that's dancing is a really dancing. You go to a wedding and you dance or whatever it is, you walk around in a circle, then that's not dancing. Okay, I've heard that said, but it could be that we're very simply relying on Tosfot and as well as that other. Again, the principle of mutav sheyu shogegin, that's going to explain why we would not rebuke other people that do it, but it doesn't mean you can do it yourself. But what the Ramah brings at the end says why you can. Now the Mishnah Berurah says something interesting over here. Mishnah Berurah says Lom Rakdin. He says b'yom simchat Torah mutar la'aked. Okay, on simchat Torah you're allowed to dance. B'shah shomrim kilusim de Torah mishum kvod haTorah, and you're allowed to dance because of kvod haTorah. But you'll say, but there's a gzeira. How can you just allow it? So the answer is kevan delei pazela mishum shvut. Right, this whole gzera of lo maktin is a yisud Rabbanan anyway. So Rabbanan said in the case of Kvod Torah, there you are allowed to. Okay, he does say that this talks about this kishkush papamonim that are having the bells that you have on the Sefer Torah. So ordinarily speaking, we just carry the bells and they make a noise. That's okay, you can say that's not intentional and that's just happening. But if you're dancing around, and shaking the crowd of the Sefer Torah with the bells, that you should not do because that is making music. Okay, now we saw another case of mutav sheyu shogegim al yom hazidim, and that was related to Yom Kippur. So have a look here, the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tafresh Chet. Here it is in Hilchot Yom Kippurim, and essentially quoting Gemara. The Shulchan Aruch says as follows: Nashim shochlot v'shotot ad shechashecha. So you have these people, you have these women who are eating and drinking until nightfall. Obviously, it doesn't mean actually chashecha. So the Gemara as well, it doesn't mean actually chashecha. There has to be a moment just before it gets dark when you would obviously stop, because nobody knows the exact moment when nightfall is going to occur or not. Nightfall really would mean shkia, which that implies, by the way, Tosfot points out that the Tosefet of Yom Kippur has to be more than just one moment, because everybody's going to keep one moment because before you get to shkia, but you have to have something a little bit more than that. In any event, says the Shulchan Aruch, right? Nashim shochlot v'shotot shechashecha, v'ne'en yodot shemetzah losif mech. Am I still online? Can people still hear me? Internet connection is unstable. Okay, maybe it's something I said. So the point is that they don't know, right? So in such a case, we say we don't protest, we don't say anything that they should not do it intentionally. Adds the Ramavu adin b'chol dvar isur. Amrinan mutav sheyu shogegin v'lo yu mazidin. Says the Rama, when do we say this principle of something that's forbidden and people don't know? They're going to do it anyway. Then we say mutav sheyu shogegin v'lo yu mazidin. V'davka sheino mefurash b'torah al pi shu d'oraita. Okay? The limitation is things that are not explicit in the Torah. So it could be that it's a din d'oraita, but it's not explicit in the psukim. But if it is explicit, so then we do. If you know that you're going to tell somebody what they're doing is wrong and they're not going to listen to you, so then you should not rebuke them in public. Like פעם אחת, just maybe once, and then afterwards you don't have to say it again. אבל לא ירבה בתוך אחות, מאחר שיודע שלא ישמעו אליו. But you shouldn't do it many times because you know they won't listen to you. אבל ביחיד, חייב להוכיח. Talking about things that are explicit in the Torah. So in private, you have to tell the person. You have to know how to tell the person, when to tell the person, etc. That's what the Ramah says. The Chazon Ish says that nowadays there's nobody who knows anymore how to fulfill the mitzvah of tochacha. So there's what to talk about. Obviously, a person should use sechel yashar, right, to know if the person's going to listen to them, if the person's not going to listen to them, when they should say, when they shouldn't say. But again, the general principle is that if you know that a person is not going to listen to you, you're not going to have any impact on them, then you certainly should not say. Right? The Mishnah Berurah points out something, interesting. With them, it says, it's when you know the person's not going to listen. When there's a doubt, when they might listen, so then you need to protest even when it's things that are derabanan. Okay, and obviously it should be done gently and it should be done appropriately in the way. If people have questions in terms of how this takes place, halacha l'maaseh, because at the end of the day, this is not a halacha l'maaseh shiur, it's a Gemara shiur. But if people want to know how to implement and put this into practice, so that they should be discussed and examined on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so that's it for today. I'm going to stop now before the internet cuts out on me again. And have a good day, everybody. Those who are able, there's an excellent shiur here starting at 9:15 in Biknes Tanasi. So those that are nearby are welcome and invited to come. And otherwise, we will see you tomorrow.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Thank you.
Good luck today.
Good.